Linux OTC. Welcome to episode 22. We're your hosts. I'm Bill.
I'm Eric.
That's it. That's all
Just
of us.
us. That's it. That's all you get.
That's all you get.
It's a budget episode.
But, you know, the show, as they say, must go on. And
I've heard that.
I've heard other people say it. I guess it's true. I don't know. When I think about these things, I think about people on the road and that, because like Dale CDL, friend of the show, also part of Mintcast, he's actually on the road right now. He lives in Ohio, and he's on the road in Ohio on a weekend. That just sucks to
He has
no
a very
end.
interesting monthly kind of cadence with his schedule where he has to plan the pickup and then actually goes and gets it and has the whole, scheduled. And I know you guys can only drive so much per day and all of that. So, but yeah, it's interesting to record the podcast, Distro Hoppers Digest, with him because it's all usually based on his schedule and like when the window of opportunity that we have while he's home and not involved with, his trucking career.
And it's a demonstration in the dismal state of the internet in this country that, he has to be in just the right locations in order to pick up. Because a lot of the truck stops have like a free Wi-Fi you can use, or you could even pay a few bucks and get a little bit better Wi-Fi out in the parking lot. And it's...
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
like a hotel or something.
Yeah, something like that, except it's on poles out in the parking lot, and everybody and their brother is hooked up to it, and I can't imagine they do any kind of
like load balancing and
or maintenance to
prioritization and upgrades.
I mean, well, just upgrades and simply reboot the doggone thing every now and then. No, I imagine it just runs constantly. And
right. They probably don't have staff there that even understand how any of it works.
No,
so.
not a chance. If it's managed at all, it's probably managed remotely somehow or another.
But I'll tell you what, though, something that I find interesting is that you and him both really do a great job of taking technology with you and incorporating it into not only the job you're doing, and so using technology to, I would assume, just do the best you can in terms of traffic and routes and stuff like that, but also just the things that you take with you, and that you do have technology that you're using and doing things, albeit, like you said, without great internet. So it's, but I do find it interesting that you've managed to, because I think about when I traveled and I would bring some things with me, but because I wasn't in a vehicle, I had space. I had to be very selective about what I could take, but you guys tend to take more things.
I've got 2 laptops with me usually, and then I just tether it off my phone. There's a couple of tools that are just, I would not be able to do anything if not for WireGuard and, mostly WireGuard, because that's the vehicle by which I SSH back into this network here. So if there's ever any problems with any of the websites or the Nextcloud server or anything like that, I'm able to SSH back in. But again, it depends. It's not likely you're going to run into a place that's so bad that you can't even get an SSH connection going, but every now and then, one challenge I run into is when I'm editing shows on the road and I need to upload that MP3 to archive.org. That can take, like the last episode of Mintcast, for example, that took about an hour to upload the first episode. Wow. And I needed to get that done where I was at, because I wasn't going to move again, because you're right, we're regulated in terms of how much we're allowed to drive. So once you get stopped for the day, you're kind of stuck there. And so I like to try to get those episodes released on Wednesday, meaning midnight, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, my time. And so I wasn't going to, if I didn't get it done there, it wouldn't have got done until later on in the day, Wednesday, which I suppose doesn't make a huge difference, but...
Well, but if you don't know what the connections are going to be like, the next place you have to stop, you have to take advantage of it, even if it's not great where you are, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have is it a sleeper cab? So you're like actually spending a lot of time in the truck itself?
Yeah, I've got like oh, it's almost comparable to a small RV or something like that because I've
Okay.
got
Okay.
you got the cab where you sit, and the two seats up front, and then there's like you can get up right out of that chair and kind of step down into the living space where there's bunk beds. The bottom bed is a proper twin size bed, 40 by 80.
Oh, okay.
And
Wow.
then there's a top bunk that folds up, and I haven't used that in probably about 4 years, but it folds up, gets out of the way, and then I've got refrigerator down at the bottom, and then there's a cabinet where I open it up, and that's got my 22-inch TV that kind of articulates out,
Okay.
and a fold down desk. That's where I do the editing and all that. And on the other side, I've got like a little nightstand with a closet behind that and a couple of drawers.
Gotcha. Decent lighting, and
Yeah,
you have any
I
kind of
got.
heating and air conditioning and stuff? Or
Oh yeah, of course. A lot of people probably don't know. Older trucks, you kind of have to leave the motor running around the clock to keep your heat and air conditioning going,
gotcha.
and your electricity. Some trucks have 110 power or regular household
Mains power.
level
Yeah.
electricity if it's equipped with a voltage inverter. Mine does not. I've got one that it's like an aftermarket thing that just plugs into a cigarette lighter outlet, and then I can plug my laptop into that.
Okay.
Lighting is great. I've got there's little like personal lights all over the place, but there's a two bulb fluorescent light in the ceiling, and I think it's about 24 inches long by about I don't know 6 or 8 inches wide, and
Okay.
that just lights it up like the inside of a
So,
doctor's
so it
office.
feels comfortable, like
Yeah,
you're not
it's-
in like a cave or something.
I mean, some of these trucks are ridiculous with the comfort. They make some
Well,
that
the
are,
size of some of the
Yeah.
the sleeper I've seen that are like twice as big as the cab, and it's like, holy, what's going on in there?
the thing about those kind of trucks, the more you do, the heavier the truck is going to be. And, it's not just the amount of time that we're governed.
It's the fuel.
Well, it's the weight, the total weight. We can only
right,
be
right.
80,000 pounds total gross weight, which means
Okay.
that's less freight you can haul the heavier your truck is, and which translates to less money you make.
I guess I didn't realize they included the truck in that
Yeah.
gross vehicle weight. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That makes
it's
sense.
the whole thing. And like for example, with a regular van trailer, and our trailers vary in weight to a certain degree, but roughly, the truck and the trailer empty is about 36,000 pounds, and we can gross 80,000 pounds total. So I mean that gives you an idea how much we're allowed to put in that box for freight, and sometimes you got to play a game with the fuel where you can't fill your tanks all the way up, because diesel fuel runs you about 7 or 8 pounds per gallon, which when you've got 300-gallon tanks, that can add up real quick. But
Yeah, that's a good point. And in terms of like way stations and stuff like that, and are they getting more sophisticated with that kind of stuff?
I think they were, and because they've got some of the what we call super coupes, where they've got like a big garage set up where they'll bring you in and inspect you and all that. They've got some fancy technology where you can drive through. They snap off a picture of you, and then they've got some infrared sensors that are measuring everything from the temperature of the brake drums,
Oh, wow.
because they can sort of discern the effectiveness of your brakes,
If you're heavier, the brakes
Yeah.
have to work harder.
and if they're if they're over a certain temperature, then maybe they should have been replaced already or something like that. Or and then there's other sensors up there
Oh,
that's measuring.
so safety stuff too, then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's the weight is only a portion
Got it.
of the regulation. We're over regulated in most people's
I was just
opinions.
thinking, like, it's incredible the amount of
Yeah,
regulation.
there's a lot to learn for anybody that's coming out new, in the job, and it can be really overwhelming. And I don't think people coming, like new people coming into the industry, are making as much money as they probably should to make up for that level of.
It sounds like you need to really put in a lot of time.
You
It's not
do.
just sitting behind jumping in. I mean, obviously the act of learning how to drive that type of vehicle safely and, backing up and making wide turns and all that sort of stuff, and then just general traffic safety. I've watched enough. One of my guilty pleasures is the traffic videos on YouTube where it's either, truckers or just, people driving like maniacs. But yeah, there's so many videos of like people just don't pay attention to trucks. They don't realize like that gap that a truck keeps in traffic is safety. Like that's the amount of space they need to slow down safely. And
No,
people are like,
that's
oh,
just a
that's
spot
just
for you to slide right in.
right.
I've
Right, exactly.
got two dash cams in the truck. One of them is like wired up to the system the company uses, and that I've got no
Okay.
access to that video. But then I've got my own below that. I'm thinking about starting a on my other show, Three Fat Truckers. I'm thinking about starting a segment on there called Dash Cam Wednesday or something like that, and
Okay.
and adding little dash cam videos and things that there is behavior among regular drivers that has turned out to be 100% predictable. Just the way people these days are handling certain, proliferated situations like passing and when people are in a hurry, and the most
So you
disturbing.
can spot this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And I've gotten to where I can really, I mean, anybody that's been out there a long time can kind of, there's a lot of body language involved, even though you can't actually see the entire person. People project their body language through the vehicle in a way.
Interesting.
It is, because there is people will get when they're looking a certain way, they'll get the car closer to one side or the other.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I can tell if they're wanting to jump in front of me because they're trying. they'll try to match speed, and then there are little indicators that kind of lead you to know what this person's gonna try and do. The latest most disturbing trend that's been kind of, I don't know, coalescing into existence over the last 10 years is people passing on the right, which
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, in Florida, they actually don't have a law against that. You are allowed to pass on the
there
road.
really isn't a law per se against it. It's just a bad thing to do, because you
Well,
have to
I mean,
understand. You've got about 13 feet of blind spot on the passenger side. I'm sitting 8 feet in the air on the other side of the truck.
Yeah.
And so what I like to do, I like to act like I don't see them. And I like, because I want them to learn. You got to learn, okay?
A little tough love for you.
Yeah, a little tough love. I mean, I'm not going to run them over, but I want them to, for a second, believe that this guy does not know I'm here. And if I can do that in a controlled environment,
Safely, right? Yeah, of course.
I don't, it's arguable, but if I can do that in a controlled environment and teach somebody that, oh my gosh, maybe he can't see me, maybe I better not do that ever again,
Yeah.
I kind of believe that maybe there's a positive outcome to be had there, but
It's by and large, I feel like in terms of driving awareness and safety, that I would say truckers are probably you know, because it's their profession and because there's such harsh penalties for having wrecks and things like that, that, you know, you guys are more aware in general, like you're saying, you know, just making a study of traffic patterns and behaviors and anticipating things. And that's really, I would assume, the biggest thing is being defensive and anticipating that, hey, that guy looks like he's really not paying attention, or maybe he's on his phone, or, you know, or is in a hurry. I mean, I get so much of that. So I know this is going to be laughable, but I drive a lot for my medical appointments. And last month I drove 1,100 miles or 34 hours just for medical stuff. And I mean, again, I know in the grand scheme of like driving, that's nothing. But for me, that's, you know, that's 6 hours a week, you know, many times a day, kind of, or many miles covered during that time. And it's always at highway speeds, going usually between 70 and 90 miles an hour. And people don't think about physics. What's going to happen to your body if you have to stop suddenly, or if you hit something at that speed? Yes, your car has airbags and analog brakes and skid control and all that stuff, all those safety features, but speed overcome and physics will overcome all those things, because the only thing that's really, you know, holding you to the road surface is a few square inches of rubber. And, you know, people just don't think about it. And it's amazing to see how callous and brash people are with just cutting in and out and, you know, not paying attention, looking at your phone. I mean, it's just, it really is staggering to me, because they don't think that in that instant that they're not paying attention and something could happen. And that's maybe going to mean their life, or at least such physical damage that they're never going to be the same. And it just, I mean, I guess I just don't understand. There's so much confidence in this. Like, you think about Tesla's autopilot, and, you know, that's just the tip of the spear. You're going to start seeing more and more of these technologies, and people paying less and less attention, being distracted more by their phones and all of that. I'm sure you've seen that.
The technology is, I'll get to that in a minute. The technology in the trucks, I don't have any of this stuff, but like fleet trucks, where you've got a company that's operating several thousand trucks, they've got collision mitigation technology in these trucks, and it's really, it is really, it's really in control of the truck to a large degree. As far as now, yeah, you brought up, you know, kind of taking the driving seriously. Now I've gotten to where spoke a little bit about how I can kind of predict when somebody's going to do something stupid, but I can also, it's also evident when somebody takes their driving seriously too. And you do see those people. They've got certain behaviors that are indicative of that idea, just because those kind of people tend to keep it straight going down the road. They always seem to have those sunshades in their car that they can put up on the dashboard behind their windshield whenever they stop funny. Somewhere. And then, you know, and there's behaviors that go along with that.
Well, I don't mean to like sound like it's, there's no other better way to say it and not sound like a little egotistical, but like, I take it very seriously. I always have. And I also am a very courteous driver, and I think it drives other people crazy that I am perfectly happy to go a little bit slower so that people can merge. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if everyone just realized that if you slowed down a little, add a little space in between, and let other people merge, that everyone goes faster. Yeah. We don't have to run up and slam on our brakes, and then we all slow down. And, you know, I can't tell you the number of times I'm at a dead stop on a major highway where everybody else is going, you know, between 70 and 90 miles an hour. And I think I'm going to get completely slammed from behind, and there's nothing I can do because someone's not paying attention. Like, it's a bad situation all around. But anyway, like, you know, I let people merge. I'm very cognizant of truckers and trucks, and I always let, you know, I anticipate things coming up. If there's an on-ramp coming up and there's a truck in the right lane, and that end is just it's just an on-ramp, it's not an extra lane, I know that someone's probably going to come in and cut them off. And so the truck's going to have to swing over. And so I back off, and I give them enough room to do that. Or if I'm in the middle lane, then I get in the left lane and give them a lane. like you have to pay attention to do those things. And I think that's the problem, is that a lot of people just never learn it to begin with, because I think the driving education is pathetic, and two, that they uh, just aren't paying attention. So they're not thinking ahead, like, well, the dynamics of traffic flow, and like, what do I need to do to get in the place where I need to be? And this is going to be really boring to listen to, but
I'm sure somebody's going to complain. Well, you didn't say anything about Linux at all. It's
well, no,
that's.
I actually started the conversation to get to that, because I was saying that, I was impressed that Dale and yourself are out on the road and you're away from home, yet you still find ways to use technology. And what I was getting to was, how has Linux transformed the way that you either do your job, or maybe what you do after you're doing your job, or
I don't think I could take Windows on the road, frankly, because you start up Windows and it, especially, newer versions of Windows, tries to, contact the mothership, every time you start it up. And in a situation where you've got maybe DSL speed at best, maybe a little bit more. I mean, your bandwidth speed varies so dramatically that, you just are not going to know what you got until you go and you try it. And if you got a machine that's going to, and the other thing, you're like these phones, I think I've got a 10 gigabyte data cap for the tethering. And that's a hard limit. After that, it goes to like 2G speed, and that's unusable. Wow. Period, for most things nowadays.
Yeah.
So with Linux, I can make sure, and I got Arch running on both of these machines, by the way.
You do? Oh.
Yeah. And I can make sure, I know how to make sure with Arch that there is absolutely nothing doing anything as far as networking until I tell it to, or until I go and open up a website or run a command that reaches out somewhere. And
so it's not bleeding through and eating up bandwidth with background activity and stuff. Yeah.
It doesn't even. The whole reason I went with Arch is so that I could have that low level of control, because, even like Mint or something like that, you start it up and it will try to run unattended upgrades and things like that. I know you can disable all that. You can get rid of it, but what?
That's chatty, though. You're right. It is a lot of background activity. If you do something like a Pi-hole, it's amazing to see the amount of chatter that happens on your network.
I'm running Pi-hole, and I think I've only got two machines. This machine and my phone, and maybe the laptops when I'm running those at home. And just just those few machines alone, the amount of DNS and queries that come through, it is kind of overwhelming. It's eye-opening to a large degree.
Yeah,
the amount of info that's trying to be gathered on the users.
Even just pinging. The one that I hadn't realized before is in Network Manager, by default, there's a activity or a connectivity check. And it's reaching out to an Ubuntu or a canonical server. And so I had Pi-hole set up, and I hadn't realized, and this was actually recently that I made this discovery, there's a way to actually just go in and turn it off so that it doesn't do it. But if you don't, it is, and I understand these little network pings, like it's not a lot of bandwidth, but it is overhead, and there's just a lot of that junk happening that you don't know. And you mentioned just a couple devices, but if you've got a Pi-hole running for your whole home, you've got maybe entertainment devices. My Roku is very, very chatty.
Oh gosh.
There's so many of those things, and it's amazing. In a day's time, tens of thousands of actions blocked or connections blocked that are just junk. They don't need to be happening, but these companies, it's this same mentality that allows a company to gather more data than they need on their customers and then store it away in a database just to be breached at some future date. But it just doesn't need to be the way it is, but because nobody really understands it, nobody says, well, why is it doing that? You know, or there's no backlash because of it. They just do it and figure no one cares. And yes, it is true that most people have a robust enough connection now that, you know, they don't see a negative downside from it. But anyway, so that's a
I
great example of, you know, you using Arch. Oh, by the way, Arch in the same sentence, but what do you do for Arch? The vanilla installer, or do you use a distro? Or
Oh, since they've come out with that Arch install thing,
yeah,
I've stopped. I still know how to do it, the old-fashioned way of installing it,
sure,
but
sure, sure.
there's
It was never
absolutely
that
no
hard to
reason.
begin with. I mean, honestly,
Well, they
you
did
had to
away.
follow instructions. You
Yeah,
know,
and once you understood what those instructions were, they're fine. Now there's beginner guides out there. There used to be a beginner guide, and that's been at least 6, 7 years ago now. There used to be a beginner guide on the Arch Wiki that
yeah,
really went into
yep,
detail about every little thing and
I
what you're
remember
going to
that.
see and they did away with that because they said it's because there's beginner guides out there and um, it was
Oh, I
getting
never
a
knew
little
why
bit.
they got rid of it. Yeah, I just noticed that it was gone whenever I went to look for it one time.
I've got
Yeah,
an opinion about why they got rid of it. I think
you do.
they were getting an uptick of new users, and
Oh,
I'm sorry, I've been an Arch user for 15 years, and I can tell you, and somebody might write in and fight me on this. I'm ready to go to war over this. I will die on this hill. Those people are perhaps not the developers and things, but the people that are part of the Arch community are extremely elitist, even more so than the Gen 2 people I've noticed, for crying out loud.
yeah.
They're very elitist, and they will if you ask a question on the Arch forum, you are more likely to get ridiculed for the manner in which you asked the question, because you're supposed to know exactly how to ask these questions and
Right,
use the language that
right, right.
properly describes all these things.
I'm
And
not going to answer you because you didn't do it right.
you're not holding it correctly. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I see that all the time. I don't even get on there anymore unless I've got something really really out there that I'm trying to
yeah.
accomplish.
Well,
And
and you do know that what the expectation is, and so you probably
yeah,
have done all the research and everything.
well,
So
I mean, I've been burned over the years enough times to where, I mean, and I've gotten into it with some of these people, and there's just no knocking them off of their holy little mountain. I'm sorry, that's just been my experience with the average, not the average Arch user, I would say.
right.
I think it'd be like the average person that sits on the Arch forums because they believe themselves to be such a fountain of knowledge with Arch Linux that, the community just wouldn't be able to stand without them,
Yeah, yeah,
so you get this uptick of new users, and they don't like dealing with new people that don't know how to talk Arch.
yeah.
So they try to put roadblocks in place. That's why I was really surprised when they came out with the Arch install tool,
I, I,
because
I think there's probably enough reasonable people that said, look, you know, look at the success of these third-party distributions that are essentially glorified installers. I mean, I don't mean this in a negative way. Endeavor OS is a great example of it's one that I've followed from the
absolutely.
beginning. I'm friendly with the developers. It is the easy mode for installing stuff, and also some of the utilities they include make it easy to set up your mirrors and stuff like this. The
Yeah.
basic stuff that you need to do to get going, right? They don't make them a lot of decisions for you, but I think there's probably some resentment of those. And I know there's like, well, you're not really running Arch if you're using that. Well, I am. It doesn't change. It's not like Manjaro where you're actually running. You are technically running Arch, but it's in a very controlled, measured way that you could definitely argue, okay, this isn't mainline Arch kind of
it,
thing.
it is controlled, but you still run into, even with Manjaro, you're going to run into the same sort of Arch centric problems where
Right.
you might install a piece of software that has an associative system D service, and you need to know what that service is, and you need to know that you have to enable and start that service on your own. And there is software out there that's got multiple system D services that need to be started, and if they don't get started, they don't work. And if you don't know that, you don't know that. So you install a piece of software and it doesn't work, and then you're like, well, this thing didn't work. And of course, the documentation's great, but you're gonna need that documentation in order to get that stuff working. So even with Manjaro, you're gonna run into some of that stuff. And I'm sure there's a way. I just have never. I don't know why. I've never looked for something in the AUR like a Pac-Man hook that will enable every system D service or timer or whatever.
Without you needing to remember to do it.
Yeah, you don't just need to remember that it needs done. You need to know what they are. So you either
Yeah.
have to go and cat the
Yeah.
where it's all stored and find out which ones are sitting there and need to be running, or you need to be looking at the documentation.
It's easy to argue against the Arch way of doing it, where it's additive.
Yeah.
What that's what it's what you want, right? It's the whole
Right.
point. If you've educated yourself enough and you understand the different offerings, the different distributions, and the methodologies behind them, the principles, and all of that, and you will favor Arch if you, like you said, want that low level sort of granular control, that you understand your system, what it's doing, because you're the one that put those things in place and manage them. I've become a little disillusioned. I was a huge Arch user for many, many years. I literally just, and I think a big part of it, and I just watched the Infinity Galactic video this morning about package systems. He talks about the difference between Flatpak, Snap, and App Image. And
Oh yeah.
those have definitely changed the way that I use distributions. Arch was such a treasure for such a long time because it was the one that was always the rolling distro that, there are other rolling distros, but Arch was always the one that I think that appealed to me the most. And I loved that sort of cutting edge, up to date, especially when I was into constantly messing with my system. Like when I was never happy with just leaving it alone for more than 2 days at a time and just had to change something. Arch was fantastic for that because I had so much control. I didn't have to undo things to do other things. And, but recently it's funny, I have tried using it, and that same flexibility I feel like has gotten more, it's made it so much more difficult to use than something like, a stable, boring system with Flatpak, for example, where I can just get all of the up-to-date software. So the whole point of running a rolling release is kind of not there anymore. Like the reason for going through all of that, unless I want to have that low-level control and do something on the system level, if I'm just talking about needing up-to-date applications, then that's why I'm using Linux Mint, because it's just stable. It doesn't do anything except run basically security updates. And I can use Flatpak and App Images and get the stuff I want. And honestly, it's also more difficult to run Arch in a lot of cases because the software I run that isn't a Flatpak is usually available as a deb or an RPM file. And yes, there's the AUR. And I agree that the AUR is brilliant where the package is well supported and popular, but there are so many sort of smaller packages and pieces of software that are on the AUR that are great for 6 months and then languish. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do now? Outside of trying to figure out how to package it myself or something like that. It really does make it more difficult. So the last few times I've tried to use it, I've actually found that, just using Fedora or, Mint, Debian, Ubuntu, just it's easier. And this goes sort of leads me into a conversation we started yesterday.
Yeah.
I'll give you a chance to respond, and then
Well,
we can crack that nut a little bit if you want.
right on. I think that's fair criticism. Okay. I think we're going to get to a point where you're going to be able to install everything with Flatpak and App Image and to a lesser degree Snap and have the same sort of expectation that you that you might have if you're able to install a piece of software natively with the package manager. Right now, I just don't think we're there yet because we're kind of all over the place in terms of the level of interoperability some of these flat packs and things
Yeah.
have with the operating system. Some of this stuff is, kind of superficial. Like, for example, the Audacity. If you go and get Audacity and you run the app image straight from the website, which is what I run, you get a very basic Windows 95 looking theme because it cannot communicate with Mint's themes or whatever. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
even know
Mm-hmm.
what the mechanism in app image is that does that. The Flatpak does integrate with the theme, and it seems to be working okay now. These things kind of sometimes they're managed by the upstream development team. Sometimes they're not. That's the thing about this. It's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, the AUR is maintained by the community that's using Arch Linux, and if you create an AUR package, and it's not a package, it's basically a script that
Mm-hmm.
tells the system, go and get these dependencies. Well, sometimes these tool chains will change right out from under the AUR, the package that's actually getting installed from the AUR, and that will cause things to break. And it's not immediately clear if you're not used to using Arch and the nuances that go along with that you need to, the package is not outdated, but you still need to rebuild it because the tool chain moved out from under it. So you have to,
Yeah.
all the,
Yep.
dynamic linkers and all that need to be redone and all of that stuff. But I, being comfortable or having accepted that level of jank, if you will, with the AUR, I think kind of made it a little bit easier for me to start using flat packs and app images. Now, Snaps is a completely different problem altogether. Snaps is maintained by one company, and that company has its operating system that it is beholden to, and
Mm-hmm.
Snaps is basically a product that needs to work on that. And if you get it working on other versions of Linux, other distributions, great. But some of these Snaps, because of how much they went out and pitched this whole Snap thing to all of these different projects out there and convinced all these people they need to make a Snap and all that, and you had them at first, but then, like most things, people kind of, they don't really see the value in it, so they kind of let it slide to the side, and now you've got
Yep.
Snaps that haven't been updated in a couple of years now, and the unfortunate that's the unfortunate thing that can happen with this. I think in Flatpak's case, they're probably the most likely to be able to be effective for most users of any Linux distro. I'm just not to the point yet because there's just so many things like a browser, for example. From what I understand, the browser still cannot connect to a Samba server from a Flatpak or an app image, and I think that's part of the reason. There's just some challenges that we're just not at the place where we can get over them yet, and I think that's why Mozilla is choosing to, at long last, make this PPA that's got devs in it, which was an interesting thing. that was an interesting development. I think that after all of this
Yeah.
plugging away at the universal package systems,
Well,
they just
so
end up
that's
making.
always been a bit of a challenge for developers is they want as short a distance between their release process and release cycle and the end user as they can achieve without needing to go through a bunch of hurdles to get through that, to get to the user. So, if I'm running a piece of software and there's an update, and this is an advantage in some cases of running something like Windows and Mac, is that piece of software can tell me, hey, there's an updated version, go download it. Or if you happen to be using a package manager that is keeping up with those, then you get an up to date piece of software. If you're running a long term support version of a Linux distro, then you're sort of stuck with the system package being an older, albeit probably more stable version of something. If you don't really care about the latest developments in something, then you're perfectly fine with that. I I tend to want the newest stuff just because I read about the updates and it's like, oh, I want to try that out. So that's why package systems, flat packs and app images and stuff like that have really, and lately I've actually been looking at Homebrew. I needed to use that to get Hugo, which is a web tool to develop websites, and the only ways to get it were through Snap or Homebrew. And there was a manual way, but it was way more complicated than I wanted to undertake. And so I
What, like
thought,
a
okay, well,
curl
this
to
is,
bash kind of thing?
well, no, it was actually more than that. You had to like set up all of the prerequisites, and there
Oh,
was dependencies and just different things. It was messy, which is, it's a great argument for these third-party package systems like Flatpak and even Snap. The fact that it contains things. I agree with you. There's complications. There are oftentimes there are categories of applications, some of which work very, very well in a containerized setup, like a Flatpak or a Snap or something like that. And some of them, like you're saying, a browser, traditionally that are so used to having that low-level system integration that whenever you don't have it, the assumption's there that it's there that it does have it, and when it doesn't, you just run into issues that it isn't going to work the way that you expect it to. I've had that happen a lot with snaps in particular, and that's one of the reasons that I don't like them. Performance and integration in terms of like visual styling and stuff like that is still not perfect, but I would argue there's some flat packs that are the same way. It really comes down to interoperability and access to the system. I feel like Flatpak, I'm able to override those things that you're mentioning, like not having access to network shares and things like that, or uh, I run a setup where all of my data, my personal folders, documents, and music and videos and all that are not actually in my home folder. I'm using links, soft links to a different partition or a different drive altogether. And in Flatpak, you have to actually, in a lot of cases, override the default security settings or the default settings that come with it so that it has access to a specific drive. So all I do is I go into FlatSeal, which is a utility that lets you adjust the permissions of Flatpaks. And I go to the particular Flatpak and I just, under the option for drives, I just enter a path that it has access to, which is that external drive. And yes, that breaks the security model or whatever, but that it needs access to that data to function properly. So that's what I do. But there are things that just don't work in those systems. And so that's where a native package really comes into play. But there's something else that I started looking at and started using because of being interested in immutable distros and atomic distros, which is DistroBox. And it's kind of like a third-party package system, except that you're getting a virtualized distribution environment. So you're getting a whole like sort of version of Ubuntu or Fedora or Arch or whatever system you want to create with DistroBox, and then within that container, you can install anything you like. And because it's a fully virtualized environment, it has low level access to that environment's internals, if you will, and it can run things in a more low level way than something like a flat pack and a snap can in some cases. So it's interesting. It's messy at times because I've got app images, I've got flat packs, I've got homebrew now. Uh, I have DistroBox in some cases. So I've got all these different things plus native packages, right? And so a lot of times I have to think, okay, what's the source of this thing and how do I deal with it? But the beauty of that is the ability to be so flexible that I can do all these things, right? I have access to all this software through all these different channels, and I can choose like this is the best way for my situation to run this piece of software. And that's an incredible capability that is I I mean, I know from a developer's perspective, they see that, and that's one of the reasons that Linux has become so popular for development is the flexibility, all the containerized aspects of things, being able to basically have your cloud workflow on your desktop because it's a like for like situation. Even Windows having WSL now, and I don't know if you've ever tried that, but it actually does really bring Linux in a big way into
It
Windows, which
does,
is
and
cool.
now that they've got graphical application support on WSL, some people it worried some people. I remember the conversation. Well, fewer people are going to use Linux. No, people use Linux because they want to use Linux. It's got nothing to
Well, what
do
is
with
Linux?
yeah.
I mean, if the expectation is that people are using desktop Linux, or it's the year of desktop Linux, or what, all of those sort of tropes and memes, I don't see that's not necessarily the value in my opinion. And funny enough, like where I started with Linux was exactly, I think, the way that some people are starting today, which is I was in a Windows and actually at that point, a DOS environment. Thank you, DOS 622. But I needed to do things that there weren't DOS utilities to do. Like I needed to, search within the body of text files and log files to find certain events and keywords and things and extract those out or look inside of documents and find, and this was medical stuff, so it was a lot of like sections of a document. I needed to find that section and then find the information that was part of that section. And wouldn't you know it, when I searched around and started looking for ways to do that, all of these interesting Linux utilities started popping up. Like the ability to, do exactly that. Like spool a file, open it, pull out the information, and then do that as in a batched way, right? In a way that I can control. It was a revelation after being sort of handcuffed with what I could do in DOS to find these Linux utilities that let me do. I'm struggling to think of the exact one that was the first one, but so many of them. And at that point, I found Cygwin that
Sigwin,
had
yeah.
some of those utilities, and that led me to Linux Server, which was sort of the next revelation of like, wow, there's this amazingly powerful system that I can run file servers and web servers and all this stuff and they run so much better on like hardware that won't even support Windows, let
Yeah.
alone, be performant with it. Um, because I had been shackled with IIS for Internet Information Server for a long time, which is Windows version of a web server, which is just hateful. Um, and to find these tools, and then that eventually led me to desktop Linux. It took me years actually between finding the utilities, the server, and then actually jumping onto a desktop. But I don't see any downside or negative to Windows having WSL because I think it gives people exactly that. It lets them figure out the right way to or solve a problem, come up with a solution. And that's really what IT people are faced with. A lot of times they're in a situation where there's a request for them to make something work magically with pixie dust because nobody understands what IT people actually do or how technology works. And so you have to be self-sufficient and understand like what's available to me. They're not going to give me tens of thousands of dollars to go out and buy licenses for stuff usually. So
No.
like, how do I figure this out? And yeah, so that was my path, and I have to assume that WSL or just you know exposure to Linux on servers or all of these sort of cloud native tool sets and
Well,
things that
I got a hot take on that actually,
okay.
because there's a lot of tools. There's a lot of applications that you can get on Windows. They've been ported over, but the mechanisms by which you get them, or they're either kept up to date, or um, it's not always it's not always obvious where to go and get on the Windows side, and it doesn't always seem like a safe thing to do. The biggest example I can think of is FileZilla, which is a utility that you can use to move files back and forth between FTP and SSH servers. And I use it a lot, and I needed it to work on Linux and Windows. Well, on Linux, of course, you've got all of the ways to install FileZilla. Well, on Windows, prior to the Windows Store, and I'm not even 100% sure if it's on the Windows Store, but leaving that aside, you can go to the FileZilla website, and it links to SourceForge, where this package is hosted for the Windows side. And when you download it and you try to install it, the installer uses about 4 separate methods to try to sneak the stupid little malware software onto your machine, like the toolbars for Edge and the little, I don't know, malware scanner. They use different
It's so
methods.
silly to even think about this stuff because you just don't even see it on Linux, right?
You
When's the
don't,
last
and
time
that's
anything you've dealt with in Linux tried to install a toolbar in your browser? Like,
do you remember when somebody would say, "Man,
oh.
my computer is just running like crap," and you go to their house.
So there was a Yahoo one, there was an MSN one, there were like 6 of them, and I remember I would remote into someone's system to try to help them. And they had this much room in their browser because it was all toolbars at the top.
Exactly.
And I'm like, don't you see that? Oh, well, I just thought it was supposed to be there. I'm like, oh, what?
And they know that. That's why when you go and you install, they were counting. And this is an open source project. And I don't think it's the project that did this. I think it was, they needed a hosting service to distribute this out on
a lot
Windows.
of third parties will pull those executables and actually bundle them into an installer that does that. Yeah.
So the FileZilla, and I invite anybody to go out and get FileZilla for Windows and install it just for fun to see what I'm talking about here, because it'll present you with a series of, click yes, 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 yes boxes like we're used to on Windows. And the first one will try to install something by putting the install button where the yes button is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The second one, you have to hit the yes button, but they put a tick box over here, and they've got it ticked, yes, install this stupid thing by default. That's the second one. Then it'll give you one where you're already done, but it's giving you a dialog box with yes, install this stupid thing, when in actuality what you need to do is hit no thanks and click that, and it goes away because your program is already installed. So it uses several different methods to try to sneak stupid crap on your machine. And that's what I'm talking about. With WSL, you no longer have to worry about, okay, I need like FileZilla. I can literally just go apt. If I've got the Ubuntu WSL, I can just apt install FileZilla, and there it is, the regular way with no stupid crap coming along with it, because it makes it feel like you're not even getting an actual version of this software that is endorsed by the original development team. But that I keep thinking about that whenever I think of WSL.
Imagine being in IT and having someone either show you that or discovering that maybe you follow a podcast or something and someone mentions it, and all of a sudden it's like the doors open. And, that's sort of how I felt 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Whenever I sort of made that discovery, which at that point it wasn't as sort of out there as it is today. I think people might have an easier time of discovering these things now, at least people who are in that industry or whatever. But yeah, that's an interesting juxtaposition or comparison of like the difference between getting software on a proprietary system and, well, so if you use Chocolatey, like again, like you said, if you use WSL or if you use Chocolatey, there's different ways to sort of circumvent the traditional channels of software distribution, and they make using those systems much less painful.
Yeah.
Just Chocolatey itself was a sort of a revelation for me on Windows because it's a package manager and it lets you install those pieces of software. But then the major important part for me is I can just run an update from the command line and it will just check and see all of those things that are out of date and will update them, which is the beauty of a package manager. And the thing that drives me crazy about using something like Windows or Mac is that it's all consolidated and it's in one place and it's so easy to manage versus needing to, and it's in a lot of cases, yes, even if the application has an update manager or an update, notification in it, it just breaks your stride. It breaks your workflow. Like you're ready to jump in, and start using, I used FileZilla for a long time. I end up just using the file manager now to do SFTP and stuff like that. But I agree with you. You'd open Notepad plus or so, whatever software you're using, and it says there's an update. And yes, you can ignore it. But if you're like me, you can't ignore it. So,
No,
you have
can't
to
either.
let it update. Because, you never know. And so, yeah, and it would just break your train of thought or it would break your stride or whatever. And it was obnoxious, where I feel like that's just doesn't happen to me. I mean,
Except on App Image. That's the one place where we've kind of gone backwards as far as the update mechanism goes. And I'm not sure if it's the same with all
yeah.
software.
Well, I use App Image Launcher, and that tends to handle it a little better, where it will kind of update in the back. It'll download in the
Okay,
background,
yeah.
and then whenever you go to start it again, it'll actually say, do you want to run or install? So it handles it a little bit differently, but I agree with you. App Image is sort of like the odd duck still. But I do find, so part of IG's video that I watched earlier today was that, app images don't integrate as tightly into the system. That's absolutely true. If you're using App Image Launcher, it at least will create, the entry in your menu or your launcher system so that you can just call it up without needing to browse to the file to open it, or needing to create your own desktop file. So that's the advantage of App Image Launcher, and just being able to uninstall or update whatever. But some developers have chosen to use App Image. Like I really enjoy Joplin as a note-taking app, and their preferred method of distributing software on Linux is App Image. Now there is a Flatpak version, which isn't, like you said, there's a lot of stuff in there that's third-party people packaging it, and
Not
it's
officially
maintained.
supported, but
Yeah,
it doesn't necessarily
maintained.
mean that it doesn't work just as good. It just means
Exactly.
it's not
Exactly.
the original developer.
I found that some of the theming stuff doesn't tend to work. For some reason, I don't know why, that particular software uses some weird combination of like Qt and I don't know, but it just doesn't look right to me in the Flatpak. So I run the App Image version. It runs fine. Yes, updates, but I also am subscribed to their GitHub notifications, so I know when there's a new version if I need to get it. Anyway, yeah, it is amazing to see the proliferation of methods to gather all this software, and I don't know if you're like me, I'm a collector. Like I tend to hear about something on a podcast or, read an article and it's like, oh, I got to try that. I got to try that. And then over time, I sort of forget all of this stuff I've collected. And then
You'll see it in your applications list, and you're like, where on earth did
what
that
is that? I don't even know
esoteric
what it
thing
is.
come from? And then,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I must have heard about something in a podcast a long time ago, and tried it. Like, I was looking for
Yeah.
a tool, and I can't believe this isn't more. I must be holding it wrong because I'm looking for a tool that when I create a little bit of HTML, it like generates a real-time image of what I've created.
Oh, yeah.
Because
I think like VS Code has a built-in like a way to do that or a plugin to do that.
yeah, that's what I keep hearing. I need to find something to walk me through that because I keep seeing things that are supposed to work, but then when I try it, I don't know. Maybe I'm just holding it wrong. I'm not a
No.
developer, but I do write some. There's some HTML involved in making the entries on the websites for the shows. And I'd like to be able to see that all that stuff's going to work before I
Yeah.
put it up there.
Yeah, uncompiled stuff is really like I've been watching. I have a friend that has been picking up development. He's in his late 30s and he wants to start game development. And so it's Vashinator on YouTube. But yeah, he's decided he wants to start game development at 38, I think he is. And
Wow.
so he put out a video of like why do this, right? And so mainly it's he wants to challenge himself and all that. But anyway, the point being that I've sort of started down that same path a bunch of times where I'll decide I'm going to learn this or learn that. The only reason I know HTML and CSS and some JavaScript and PHP is because it's what I use for building websites and stuff like that. So I know enough to be dangerous. But HTML and CSS are actually a great place to start because you don't need to compile them and you just sort of can play around and it's really easy. You just need a text editor and a browser. And
Basically, yeah.
anyway, yeah, I do want to actually learn. So he's kind of inspiring me to want to learn again. But if you don't have a project or you don't have a real reason, that's always been my problem. Like, not just with programming, but even with like this, discovering and trying new software. Like if it's just something I don't have a need for, like I'll play with it a little bit and understand that, yeah, there's all this potential. But if I don't have a reason to use it, then, I have a hard time convincing myself to keep pushing forward through those like roadblocks that you hit. So
I think
anyway,
when you
that
get
was a
middle
roundabout.
aged, you need that goal. You need that stretch goal out in front of you. What I'm trying to do is
Well,
learn how to.
your time's important, right? I mean, you get
Yeah.
people that rely on you. They're expecting you to earn an income, and
Right.
you only have so much time to sort of say, okay, I'm gonna use this to either educate myself and learn a new skill, or watch a movie, or take a nap, or whatever things. You have such a short amount of time to spend on stuff that you just want to do, and yeah, it's hard to think. I a couple years ago had sort of thought, okay, programming of any kind can be a very marketable thing. It's just the amount of time it takes to get proficient with something and actually sort of, be marketable, right? And so, that's a long process. It's not like, oh, in 3 months' time, like I'm going to know enough to really be valuable enough to, be employable. So, there's sort of that it's going to be many years before you're actually probably good enough to earn decent money doing it, right? Or have it be a career, right?
Yeah.
And just the idea of that type of a time commitment.
Because it's
At
not just your time.
48.
The people
Yeah,
that
I'm
are, around you, it's their time too that you're
Yeah.
kind of using to learn this new thing or whatever.
Yeah, I was 45 at the time, and it's just like, man, if it's going to take me like 5 years, and maybe not 5, maybe 2 or 3, but at this age, I don't learn as fast as I did. It takes me a lot longer to sort of like get into the not the mood, but I don't know how to say it. You got to get your mind into the sort of space of like, okay, I'm going to learn. I'm going to sit here and do this and get myself all sort of situated and ready, and hopefully there's not anything distracting me. And like, I feel like when I was young, I just had so much time and opportunity to sit and do whatever I wanted. If I wasn't actually working, I just had so few commitments and also had so much energy. Like I could just sit in front of a computer for 12 hours at a time and not even think about like or realize how much time I've spent just being completely engrossed in whatever I was doing. You know, not being distracted, not thinking about anything else, just really focused. And the amount I could accomplish in such a short amount of time, I just can't do that anymore, you know? And the idea that I would commit to learning and trying to build a new career, it just kind of felt impossible, which is defeatist and really dumb. And I should just say, no, give it a try. But I do need an actual project. So I think maybe the way that I'm going to accomplish that is to try to get. I use WordPress for a lot of the stuff I do,
Yep.
just because it's sort of the standard and gives your clients the ability to make changes if they want, and it gives you a lot of capabilities just sort of by virtue of what it is. But it's also very monolithic and huge, and hosting required is really expensive, and there's a lot of overhead to it, all the plugins and the maintenance, and like it's a lot. So I would like to start doing things more sort of bespoke and building things myself. But a couple things. First, the time it takes to do it. Can you get a customer to reimburse you for that amount of time? Yes, if I'm learning it, I expect that I'm not actually going to be able to recover all the time that I'm spending, because it's not fair to a customer, I think, to pay me to learn. Um, you know, it's what I've done over the years. Like I've learned a lot while being paid to learn it, but I also think it's not fair to, if a normal project by someone who's proficient would take 8 hours and it's going to take me double that, like I can't charge someone 16 hours for, I just don't feel right doing that. Anyway, but I think that that's my opportunity, is to try to break away from ready-made things. And there's also, I think, maybe opportunity in open source stuff. Like there's a lot of times that a project or a piece of software is almost where I want it. Or things like plugins, like a system like, I was talking to someone about Joplin. Joe wants to use Joplin, but there's currently no add-on that allows you to require a password to open a specific note, which a lot of note-taking apps provide. Maybe there's an initial password to get into the overall application, but then if you go to a specific note, it gives you another you ask for another authentication to view that note. Joplin currently doesn't have that, and I think about those types of situations, and I'm like, well, how complicated is that, right? And what's involved with that? Like, what languages would I need to understand? And so I think I need to just let go of this. Well, I'm too old, or I don't have time, or whatever, and also all the things that I spend time on that maybe aren't as important, like binge watching some kind of television show or something. Maybe that's time better spent doing that. But I don't know. I haven't quite gotten there yet, but maybe I will, and maybe that'll be good content for me to talk about on here. I don't know. So.
Yeah, and anybody wants to hire Eric, show at linuxotc.org. Sounds like he needs a goal.
Yeah, right. Right.
We need one more thing to do.
Well, that's what's crazy. So, what I've come to understand about a lot of, especially freelance type work, like I'm not a developer per se. I call myself a technologist. I understand systems and, website structures, and like there's way more to building a website than just the code that's underneath of it, or the utilities or the pieces that you put together. It's a lot of interacting with the customer to understand what their business is, what their goals are, what their needs are. How does search engine optimization work? How does visual design work? There's so many elements to it
then the mechanical elements of just optimizing the speed of it all and
Yeah,
having the right tools in
hosting, the
place,
back end stuff, like all of
Redis
that.
and all
Yeah,
that.
exactly. And so I understand all of that to a certain depth. I understand the DevOps stuff way more in terms of like the servers and the like. That's just my background, and so I run my own servers and all that stuff because I'm comfortable doing it, and because it's cheaper than me paying for the high end hosting that would need otherwise.
Right.
But I have also come to understand that my value to my customers isn't that I can sit there and code, some piece of software. It is that I help them understand their business, that I, help them set the goals that they're looking to set. I, help them target the customer base they're looking for. Like, it's almost more business development than it is website development. And because so few businesses actually understand what they're doing. A lot of businesses just start organically. Like, they just had an idea and they kind of tried it and it worked, and they just kept doing it and kept doing it. But there was never any real foundational planning involved with it,
And I think it's almost kind of an extension of this concept that's always been around, where you would go like the Main Street shopping kind of thing that used to exist and still does to a lesser degree, where you would go to these storefronts and it was clear some of these people had real presentation skill in putting together the storefront. And I kind of think that's a similar skill set when it comes to making these websites. And, like WordPress will kind of give you a head start with some of that to some degree, because they've got all these different templates and things you can use and themes, and it really helps you along. But you still kind of have to have that creativity to take those tools and put it together in a way that kind of draws people into a business,
I think that's true of anything. I mean, how many carpenters have you seen build something unbelievable with like a hammer and like the most basic tools, and then you get some tryhard who's got all the like expensive gear and cordless this and all the like, and they're not even close because they just don't have the same skill set, or they don't have the same depth of knowledge or whatever. So tools are one thing, they're important, they need to be, but the exercise of those, or the application of them, is really where, and I feel like I have I've always had this difficulty, and this isn't like a therapy session or something, but I've always had this difficulty of valuing my expertise, because things that seem trivial to me, I've come to understand by talking to other people, like all of the dumb little, factual things that I understand and know about technology. I feel like I don't know anything. Like, in the grand scheme of things, there are people that know so much more than me in every possible aspect of anything that I do, that I always have this, like, what do they call it? Not pretender, but imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I've always felt that way. I felt that way in my main career. I feel that way in my business now. I feel that way when I talk about things on a podcast.
Oh, the podcast,
I'm always
for
questioning.
Real. Because I went to no school for any of this stuff. I know exactly what imposter syndrome is. And when I started with Mentcast, the only thing that kept going through my head is, who do you think you are? And you literally have to force yourself past that and just, well, if nothing else, I'm going to fake it till I make it. And you get a lot of things wrong, but you eventually, you realize, okay, I am smart enough to at least add something to the conversation, and then you just kind of build on that. And imposter syndrome is just kind of one of those things that you chip away at. It's a terrible barrier. It is something that a person can feel for real, and it does get in the way, but you can't let it stop you completely.
Well,
anyway,
what I've come to understand is that so much of this like knowledge that I have in my head is actually really valuable, and I just need to find the best application for it and
Yeah.
get over that imposter syndrome. And I don't know. The dream would be finding some job or way to earn income within Linux. I've never been able to do that. I always look at people that have managed to do it and think, man, that to me would be like making it, right? To be somehow just, I don't care what it would be like from an IT perspective or a consultative perspective, or like, it just doesn't matter. Like, I think it would be so cool to just have, you know, an involvement in open source and then be able to make that into a career to where you can actually earn a decent wage doing it.
Make a living making one of these things that people like us talk about on these
Yeah. Yeah,
shows.
exactly.
You know.
Yep.
Well, we
And
better
I think
get out of here.
development kind of gets me into that. So yes, this was quite a grab bag.
It was, but you know, that's kind of who and what we are. So
Yeah.
every time I think, you know, a show, it's just going to be two of us. I've gotten to the point where I don't worry about it anymore because Joe and I did just the two of us. We did Mintcast, and that was fine. And,
Yeah, it was. It was.
And it ended up being long enough to split into two shows, and this is over an hour now. So
Yeah.
I don't even worry about it anymore. Anyway, get in touch. Let us know what you think. Show at linuxotc.org. We're on Discord. We're on Mastodon. There'll be a notification on Mastodon when the show releases. I don't know. Email and the website's probably the quickest way to get to us. Anyway, we'll be back in 2 weeks, I guess. It'll still be the holidays. If not, we'll let you know. But until
Someone
then,
will be back.
somebody will be here. Somebody will be doing something.
That's right.
Whether or not it's worth listening to, that's for you to
Come
decide.
on.
Anyway, see you then. Until then, I've been Bill.
And I have been Eric.
See you later, folks.